Ancient history, from myth to reality. The true story of Hai Ba Trung.
Do you believe that the history of Vietnam was once written by two women riding elephants straight into an ocean of invading troops? Two sisters, not legendary generals, not kings or emperors. Armed only with hatred for oppression and unbreakable will, they shook the foundations of a mighty empire. This was not just an uprising. This was the first thunderclap against 1,000 years of northern domination. But what transformed these two women into the greatest legends in Vietnamese history? Are you certain you know the full truth behind the uprising of the Trung Sisters? Get ready, because what comes next will leave you astonished. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you won't miss our journey through ancient history with vanished empires. 1st century AD. The land of Giao Chi, the homeland of the ancient Vietnamese, lay under the brutal rule of the Han dynasty. They not only plundered resources but also imposed foreign culture, harsh laws, and crushing taxes on the native people. Each passing day was a chain of oppression, where cries of suffering were drowned beneath the boots of the invaders. The Vietnamese did not just lose their land and wealth. They lost the very right to live true to their own identity. When men were forced into labor, countless families were torn apart. When women were despised and humiliated, it was as if the soul of the entire nation had been broken. But every endurance has its limit. The most tragic story was the killing of T. Sach, the husband of Trung Trak, executed simply for daring to oppose cruel policies. His blood became the fire that fueled the rage of the Vietnamese people. And from that blood, history changed its course. In the shadows, a storm was quietly rising. Across the land, from plains to mountains, people whispered the names of two women, Trung Trak and Trung Nhi. No one imagined they would be the lightning bolt to tear through the night of slavery. But how could two sisters gather tens of thousands in such a short time? What power did they awaken that made an entire nation rise with them? The answer will astonish you. Oppression did not come only from taxes and forced labor. The Vietnamese people were suffocated with every breath. Han officials ruled with brutality, treating the natives as nothing more than cheap slaves. They cut away fragments of freedom, turning local culture and beliefs into objects of scorn. In that dark setting, the greatest tragedy struck. T. Sach, a young leader, husband of Trung Trak, was executed for daring to resist. His blood was not just the death of one man, but the spark that ignited a nation. People whispered through their tears, "If T. Sach has fallen, who will lead us?" And then, two names echoed through the endless nights. Trung Trak, Trung Nhi. Not only wives or sisters, but blazing torches guiding tens of thousands of souls. The cause of the uprising was not only anger toward the Han. It was the grief of losing loved ones. It was the suffocation of a culture that could not be silenced. It was the burning desire to restore sovereignty to a nation. A fire born in one heart spread to another, until it became a sea of flames. What shocked the world was that two women dared to challenge a colossal empire. Can you imagine the spiritual strength it took for an entire people to place their trust in them? That eruption was only the beginning, and it would forever change the fate of Vietnam. Stay with us, because in the next part, you will see how from the shadows, the uprising blazed into the light. And before we continue, hit subscribe to join us on this journey into the heroic pages of history. From personal grief, Trung Trak transformed her pain into a banner for the entire nation. Together with her sister Trung Nhi, she began a daring act no one could have imagined, calling the people to rise against the Han Empire. At first, it was only whispers in the dark. Small groups, secret gatherings by the fire, eyes burning fiercely through the night. Everywhere, people listened. from dispossessed farmers to tribal chieftains of the mountains. All carried the same wounds, and now they shared the same hope. What stunned the world was how two women turned anger into strength. They did not merely speak of suffering. They showed their people a path out of slavery. And most of all, they rekindled a sense of national pride, buried too long beneath the boots of Han rule. Soon, from a handful of followers, thousands began to assemble. Villages offered their food supplies. Blacksmiths forged crude weapons. And then came the war elephants, symbols of power and defiance, striking terror into the enemy. An unprecedented sight, two women riding elephants, leading a storming army. This was more than an uprising. It was a message hurled straight at the Han court: we will kneel no longer. But how could a ragtag force with crude weapons stand against the mighty legions of a vast empire? Could faith alone be enough to forge victory? The answer lay in the first battles, where for the very first time, the world turned its eyes to two names, counterattack and Trung. Year 40 AD. The flames of rebellion erupted with fury. The Trung Sisters officially raised the banner of revolt. In just a few short months, the first battles shook an entire empire. A force of farmers, artisans, and tribal leaders, seemingly ragtag, became an unexpected storm. Han garrisons scattered across Jiaoqi were crushed one after another. Strongholds once thought impregnable fell into rebel hands. For Milin, the banner of uprising spread like fire fanned by the wind. It was not only a military triumph, but a spiritual one. For the first time in decades, the people saw their enemies flee before their own strength. Wherever the rebel armies marched, villagers poured out to welcome them. The pounding of war drums, the roar of elephants, and the cry of "Restore our nation" thundered across every hamlet. Within months, the Trung Sisters seized 65 fortresses, a number so staggering that even Chinese historians recorded it with astonishment. From women once dismissed and underestimated, the Trung Sisters became a haunting specter for the Northern Empire. Yet, a painful question arose: were these lightning victories enough to secure lasting independence? Or were they only a brilliant flame destined to flicker out in the storm? The story does not end here. For the enemy never accepts defeat so easily. And the Han counteroffensive would become the true trial of survival. If you wish to follow this heroic yet tragic journey, hit subscribe so you won't miss the next chapters of ancient history. Because the past has never been just what was, it is a mirror that reflects the present and the future. After a cascade of resounding victories, all of Jiaoqi trembled before a truth never before seen in history. The Han had been driven out. And on this land, for the first time in 1,000 years, an independent dynasty was born under the leadership of the Trung Sisters. Counterattack ascended the throne, proclaiming herself queen, ruling from Milin. The image of a warrior queen on an elephant, clad in silver armor, was not only a symbol of victory but also living proof of the nation's pride. Those who once lived in the shadows of slavery now stood tall. They no longer feared. They had a government of their own. Historical records tell us the Trung Sisters ruled over 65 citadels, encompassing nearly the whole of what is now northern Vietnam. The people rejoiced, reviving rituals, culture, and traditions long suppressed. A new era dawned, one where women not only stood as equals but held the very throne. Yet within this radiant light, dark clouds slowly gathered. The Han, a vast, wealthy empire, could never tolerate losing such a strategic land. Would they allow the Trung Sisters to reign, or return with a storm fiercer than ever? That first independent dynasty was glorious, but fragile, like a flame bursting into life against the winds of a storm. The question remains, Could that light endure, or would it be extinguished by the brutal hand of the North? The story continues with the Han's brutal counterattack. Stay with us, for the next chapter will reveal this truth. The Northern Empire never forgets revenge. The Han dynasty never accepted defeat. News of the Trung Sisters' uprising reached all the way to Chang'an, like a stinging slap to the pride of Asia's most powerful empire. They had lost not just a territory, but their authority. If Zhao Qi could rise up, others might follow. At once, Emperor Guangwu launched a brutal reconquest. Tens of thousands of elite troops marched south. Their commander, Ma Yuan, the general who calms the waves, a seasoned warrior who had crushed rebellions across the empire. His mission was clear: annihilate the Trung Sisters and erase Vietnam's dream of independence. The Han army poured across the border like a storm of steel. They carried superior weapons, trained in refined tactics. Meanwhile, the Vietnamese rebels relied on crude arms, unbreakable courage, and the treacherous landscape. The struggle was no longer ambushes, it was full-scale war. Every day, blood spilled on rivers and fields. The rebels fought fiercely, but the weight of an empire was crushing. Citadel after citadel fell, banners of rebellion torn down. Those who once believed in victory began to doubt. Was faith alone enough to hold freedom? Amid the chaos, the Trung Sisters still stood tall. Queens on war elephants, refusing to retreat, choosing to die with their people. They knew this counteroffensive was more than a battle, it was the ultimate test of their nation's unyielding spirit. But in that storm of iron and fire, could spirit withstand overwhelming might? And what price would freedom demand? Stay with us and witness the most tragic yet glorious chapter in Vietnam's history. Subscribe now, because the next episode will take you to the final battle, where the fate of the Trung Sisters and an entire people was sealed. Year 43 AD. The name Cam Key was forever etched as the site of the most tragic chapter in the Trung Sisters' rebellion. After months of battle, the rebel forces were broken. Supplies depleted. War elephants fallen. Those who once rose with pride now faced an unstoppable tide. Ma Yuan drove the Han army forward like a raging flood. With elite soldiers, gleaming armor, and superior warcraft, he tightened the noose around the rebels. Cam Key, once a line of hope, became a colossal trap. The rebels fought to their last breath. They knew they could not win, yet chose an honorable death over bowing in chains. Across the battlefield, the roar of elephants mingled with cries of "Restore our nation," echoing like an oath for eternity. Amid the tragedy, the Trung Sisters never abandoned their soldiers. They led from the front, fighting to the end. When no path remained, chronicles tell us they leapt into the hot river, choosing death over capture, honor over humiliation. Their sacrifice sent shockwaves. But it was not the end. From that loss, the unyielding spirit of the Vietnamese was carved into history, an eternal flame that no empire could extinguish. Cam Key was a military defeat, but a spiritual victory. A victory time can never erase. In the next chapter, you will witness the legacy the Trung Sisters left behind, not only for Vietnam, but for the history of humanity. Stay with us and subscribe so you won't miss the final act of this epic story. The death of the Trung Sisters at Cam Key was not the end. It was the beginning of an eternal symbol. In the eyes of the Vietnamese, the two sisters were not only military leaders, but the very soul of a nation. Thousands of years later, when people speak of the Trung Sisters, they do not only remember the tragedy. They remember the courage. They remember the first time in history that women not only stood as equals, but led an entire war of resistance. In an ancient world dominated by men, the image of the Trung Sisters riding elephants into battle became an unbreakable symbol. From century to century, temples dedicated to the Trung Sisters rose across the land. People offered incense, retold their story, and passed it down to future generations as a pride that would never fade. Even as Vietnam continued to face new enemies, the spirit of the Trung Sisters was still invoked as a vow: we would rather die than lose our country. Chinese chronicles may have recorded them as rebels, but in the hearts of the Vietnamese, they were immortal heroines. It is no coincidence that thousands of years later, whenever independence is spoken of, people still return to the image of the Trung Sisters. That legacy reached beyond borders. It showed the world that in history, it was not only great empires that defined an era. Sometimes, it was those who dared to resist injustice who left the deepest mark. 2,000 years have passed, yet the war drums of My Linh, the roar of elephants at Cam Key, and the vow better to die than to lose our country still echo. The Trung Sisters are not just a memory. They are the lifeblood flowing through every page of history, through every generation of Vietnamese people. Military defeat could not erase their spiritual victory. Their deaths could not extinguish the will for freedom. On the contrary, it carved a message in stone: even a small nation can rise and challenge a vast empire. Today, when we look back, we do not see only a story of war. We see faith, courage, and defiance passed down from one generation to the next. The Trung Sisters are not just Vietnam's history. They are a shared symbol for humanity's yearning for independence and freedom. And that is why their story never fades. It is a reminder that in the flow of ancient history, no empire is eternal, but the spirit of freedom lives forever. If you are moved by this tragic yet heroic tale, hit subscribe to Vanished Empires. Together, we will uncover the hidden pages of history, the vanished empires that still echo across the ages. History is never just the past, it is the torch that lights today and tomorrow.
Subscribe for more untold stories of history.